Welcome to Sherlock Monthly. I have to remember to keep saying, and it even says Mondays on my script here. That's how, I've not corrected that yet. But welcome to Sherlock Monthly. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we're going on a biblioventure through the stories of Sherlock Holmes. Today's episode is the adventure of the Dancing Men, and joining me for this episode is Scott Monty. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Ed. It's nice to be back here with you.
Great to have you back, and I thanks for returning. I guess we did something right the other couple times you've been on the shows.
You make it difficult to turn you down. Let's just say that.
Thank you. Well, everyone, for 30 weeks in 2023 and 24, we deduced, deciphered, dissected Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes adventures in a kind of conversational annotation. You can see all of those episodes on the Rosenbach's YouTube channel. Now we're continuing this biblioventure in a monthly series. Every month, a distinguished Sherlockian or two joins me to discuss one of the stories in the order they were first published. And we're also continuing the number system from the weekly program. So this is episode 34. If you are watching live right now, hey, thanks for watching, guys. Great to I'm happy to have you here live. Please like this video if you so choose. Subscribe to this Rosenbach channel and have fun in the live chat. That live chat is for you guys to have fun, enjoy yourselves during the show. You won't distract us. I like when you make, comments and all of that. If you're watching the recording, thank you. Please like and subscribe as well. And if you leave a question or comment in the comments section of the YouTube videos, I will respond to those in due time. And lastly, please consider making a donation to the Rosenbach or by becoming a member. You can do this at our website, rosenbach.org. Your support helps us create programs like this and also care for our collections. And Sherlock Monthly is brought to you by the generous support of Lisa Washington, who also supported our Sherlock Mondays program. So thank you, Lisa, for your support. And let me give a full introduction to our co-host for today, Scott Monty, BSI. Corporal Henry Wood is editor-in-chief, founder, and co-host of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. He began his interest in Sherlock Holmes in his teenage years, in which he discovered his first Sherlockian society, the Men on the Tour in Connecticut, his first social network. The Sherlockian societies around the Northeast were never the same after Scott descended on Boston and the Baker Street Irregulars invested him in 2001. He established a web presence and online ordering system for the Baker Street Journal later that year. His profession led him into digital communications, and as a side project come laboratory, Scott founded the Baker Street blog in 2005. The blog existed as a standalone site until mid-2013. And before then, in 2007, with Burt Wolder, he added a podcast, and I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere was born. And I've been listening since almost that beginning, probably like '08 or so. Maybe it was like a year or so into it when I started listening. Scott was a special guest on Sherlock Mondays, and he was a co-host for Sherlock Mondays, The Hound of the Baskervilles. Oh, so that's a big bio, but all good information. Welcome, Scott.
I like big bios and I cannot lie.
Hey, Henry Wood, you are Corporal Henry Wood. He
Yes,
is
sir.
the crooked man.
He is yes, he is the crooked man, but I like to think of myself as Henry Wood before he was the crooked
before
man.
before he was betrayed and tortured nearly to
Yeah.
death.
Yeah, it's a fun investiture. It puts me in the category of other BSIs who are also who have military investitures. We kind of have a little bit of a subgroup there, have a little fun together.
You know
Um,
how they chose that for you? Did you have a mongoose as a pet? Did you then?
uh, yeah, I have Ed, please. It's a mongoose in my pocket. I'm not excited to see you. Um, it's interesting. I know the keeper of the Speckled Band back when I first joined, John Constable. His investiture was the Crooked Man, and There may have been some inference that I was kind of part of that whole crooked man type thing of being part of the speckled band. But also, this was way back in youthful times. I was often a winner of a quiz at the speckled band, right? And Henry Wood is called the most intelligent man in the 117th foot. And another one I just pulled off of the page too, because I was about to get married that year. It was for my good looks that she loved me. So I'll take
That's
that.
why. Yeah. The pre-tortured good looks, not
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, because
Exactly.
you're not the crooked man, you're Corporal Henry Wood. And
Exactly.
difference. All the
It's like Dorian Gray, I'm the before and after.
there you go. There you go. Well, thanks for coming back again. And today we're doing the Dancing Men. I don't know if you remember this on Sherlock Mondays, Claire Danes, and I don't know if she's in the audience today yet or will be. I don't know because I don't know what time it is for her. She watches from New Zealand, and she also writes little poems for all the episode for all the stories. And she has continued to, and then we would share them with those on that show. And she's continued to do it now. So she wrote a little ditty for Dancing Men, and it is Higgledy Piggledy Dancing Men followed a maid from a gangster's den. Some in chalk and some in pen taxed even Holmes's great acumen. I love that.
That's fantastic.
Good one. Thank you, Claire. I know you'll watch this episode. If not live, you'll see it at a more reasonable hour for New Zealand. Not sure what time it is there now. They're like to next day, like tomorrow at some
It's
point.
tomorrow. No spoilers,
I
right?
don't know when it is. She's in the future. So,
Oh.
um, and you came across something. You have something in your collection related to the Dancing Men that I would love for you to share with everyone.
Yeah, this is one of those just interesting little bits that I think make the Sherlockian world so interesting. We're always on the lookout for Sherlock Holmes in the wild, right? To prove our case that Sherlock Holmes actually existed. And the chief conspirator in that area, the guy that actually got this whole thing rolling, was a guy by the name of Christopher Morley, the founder of the Baker Street Irregulars. And it was in late 1949. He was traveling over to England and he was writing back to Edgar Smith, who he entrusted to administer the Baker Street Irregulars beginning in 1940. And they have a wonderful correspondence together. And I have in my collection from a purchase I made at an auction of a bunch of Baker Street Irregulars ephemera, old menus and cards and whatnot. A simple one-page letter that had a little piece of paper clipped to it. And I'll do a screenshot if I can, or a screen share, so we can read along here. Let's see. This is where you put in the patter music, so I can vamp. Here we go. Share. Boom.
There we go.
Okay.
Now it's coming up.
So this is a letter, September 11th, 1949, from where are we writing from?
Bull
The Hill
Hotel.
Hotel,
Bull
the Bull
Hotel.
Hotel, Bull Hotel. Um, it's Conan Doyle that was set up at the Hill House Hotel in Norfolk. That'll come back in a while, but this is the Bull Hotel in Sussex, and Edgar writes, excuse me, Christopher Morley writes, excellent Thorny. And that's Thornycroft Huxtable. That was his nickname for Edgar Smith. Reporting on Dancing Men Country. If you open your Bartholomew's survey map of Norfolk and study the neighborhood of North Walsham, delicious old town with two railway stations side by side, you'll see it was only a short drive from there to the house of Cubitt Esquire. He lived either at Idingthorpe or at Ridlington, which accounts for the confusion of the two texts, Ridingthorpe or Ridlingthorpe. I went by bus very near both villages, though not actually through them. we were on our way to Munsley Paston, where the letters come from, and Beckton on Sea. I'm probably the only visitor this summer who has bathed in the cool German Ocean or Nord Sea in his BVDs. What's particularly interesting is that the literary agent took care to choose from an indigenous Norfolk name for his squire. The graveyards are rich in cubits. I enclose an advert from a North Walsham booklet to show that the family also went into trade. Even Miss Nightwork, I think, would be satisfied by such documentation. Whether Weather here remains fantastic, et cetera, et cetera. And here is the clipping from the North Walsham trade booklet. E.R. Cubitt, 8
Mhm.
Kings Arm Street, North Walsham, for carpets and linoleums, blinds, curtains, loose covers, and upholstery, et cetera, et cetera.
All your loose cover needs right there.
Yes.
Our cubits. And that Mrs. Nightwork is also a reference to, well, explain that reference to people so they know.
Jane Nightwork, that is a pseudonym that Morley wrote under for some of his contributions to the Baker Street Journal in those early days from 1946 to 1949.
That's a Smith didn't want like, so I don't have like five pieces by Christopher Morley in one issue.
Right.
Change the name of some of them.
Right.
But he adopts it as a pseudonym and he kind of gets in character when he writes to Smith.
Exactly.
And,
So I
and
mean that's part of the fun of this whole thing is this back and forth, and we lose a lot of this today because we do our stuff via email or text messages or Facebook Messenger. So all of this fun that we have behind the scenes doing this kind of stuff with each other is going to get lost to the ages. So it's wonderful that we have this documentation from those early days.
yeah. Let's actually go right ahead and I had this for a little later, but talk about that dancing men and Cubitt. The Cubitt connection isn't just that there were people in that area. As you mentioned, Doyle stayed at the Hill House Hotel. Is that what it was?
The proprietress of Hill House Hotel in 1903 was Emma Dorcas Cubitt, whose
And
husband had died in 1895, and she had 7 children. Gilbert John Cubitt and Edith Alice Cubitt were among them.
and they had an autograph book. And when he stayed there, he's so famous. Could you please sign our autograph book? And also included in the autograph book, which I will share here, was a page from Gilbert John Cubitt, who then has these curious stick figure letters along here, which I cannot read. It says, I think, Hasbro.
That's what it looks like to me. Yeah.
And then I can't read this at all. Um, could this be a IQ? I don't know what he's writing here, but they're stick figure letters. Well, letters with that are in the stick, and then on this musical notation, which it looks like his sister Edith Alice Cubitt did. They are kind of musical notation stick figures. Um, and they tell a little story here. And then he's
Yeah.
hung at the end. Like if my kids did a stick figure thing and they're getting hung, I'd be like, whoa, whoa, what's going on
Yeah.
here, kids? Do we need therapy or not? But the past, apparently. You don't need therapy. You just draw people being murdered or hung, and that's quite all right. Um, it is a musical tragedy. But this and Doyle mentioned this later that yes, this is a something that triggered an idea in him to do stick figures and he combines it with some with cryptograms and I'll talk about Poe much later when Holmes talks about how to solve it.
Yeah, and it looks like Janine and Virginia have suggested, and rightly so, that after Hasbro is 1902, the year.
Oh, thank you. That makes
Yeah.
complete sense. So there you go. Apparently I'm not as adept at solving these things, even when it's the
You're
actual letter, just
you're a
draw.
man of letters, Ed, not a man of numbers.
So and that actually that when I shared that image, that autographed book is at the Toronto Public Library, and that is where I got that image, and I will share the link to it in our chat, and you can go see it and see a little bit more written about them and the family when Doyle stayed there. Um, so it's not only, and it's not, and the connection then really becomes clear when he uses the name Cubitt for for Hilton Cubitt, who brings uh, Holmes the code to begin with, who has the problem he needs solved. The alphabet itself is interesting. Well, we'll just talk about that when we hit the alphabet. No need to hit on that now. Um, the manuscript exists for this
It
story,
does.
and you can
It
find
was lost for a long time.
there are. Oh, was it? I didn't know that.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, in Dancing to Death, which is from the BSI manuscript series, there's a wonderful story in here from uh, Don Hobbs down in Texas, who saw it firsthand in the 1980s. Uh, he said one afternoon, after 10 years of regular visits to a bookshop, it was, let's see, it was Aldrich Books, Dick Bossy, uh, Wilson's Books, Sheldon Books, Dallas Half Price Books, Barber's Books. It was at Barber's Books that he found it. Brian was the proprietor, Brian Perkins. One afternoon, after 10 years of regular visits to the shop, I walked in, and Brian asked me if I had some extra time to kill. I did, so followed him out the door and on a zigzag path through downtown Fort Worth, where we ended up at Bank One. Before we arrived at this destination, Brian had sworn me to secrecy about what he was about to show me. Intrigued, I agreed. We entered the lobby, went down to the basement where the safety deposit boxes were, and he got a key, opened it, and handed me the withdrawn contents. I looked down at the custom-made dark blue binder with gold embossed letters. The title leapt out, and it was like being slapped in the face. I was holding the original handwritten manuscript of The Adventure of the Dancing Men. So apparently, what happened is a homeless person entered the shop several years prior with a box of old books that he said he found in a city dump. He wanted $50 for them. And Brian, being a pretty shrewd bookman, gave him $100 and sent him on his way. And at the time, the manuscript had been listed as being in an unknown location. And Brian did several years of careful research to determine that the manuscript was not stolen and there were no outstanding claims against it. So that's how it made its way to the public.
And it exists, and there's a few images that are on the Arthur Conan Doyle Encyclopedia. I put that link in there, and also you can find out a lot of information about it on Randall Stock's Best of Sherlock site, which I'll put the link for that too. But here are some of the images um, of it that we can, talk about a little. This is the cover of the book, and it was bound in vellum. The people have seen this picture if you've seen our Empty House episode, because the Empty House manuscript we have at the Rosenbach is bound in vellum. Doyle did this for about 10 stories all at once, and hoping that, and thinking that, like, oh, these are great presentation copies, and some rich person will pay me $1 million for them. No one ever did, but he donated them to these Red Cross drives during World War One, and he's written on it the Dancing Men, Sherlock Holmes, A. Conan Doyle. But then here he's written Anno Belli Germanicae 4. So this is the fourth year of the war with Germany. 19, what years does that make that then? 18, I think.
Yeah, 1918
That's when it's bound, of course. No,
when it
it's
was
written,
bound,
it's
right?
written in '03. Um, and with all his manuscripts, it's just absolutely, it- it- anybody can read his handwriting. He writes so clearly across the page, um, makes very he'll make corrections after he's done writing it, or even during it. He's making little corrections, but he'll go back on a reread and make some corrections. But that's usually about it. And here it is in his own hand, the dancing men's cipher that he has come up with. Um, all through it. I think the pages that are on the site of Shale have all the dancing men in them. Um, and there you go. Here was a change here for late in the story. Maybe we can get to that later when we get to it. But but yeah, I mean, what a joy he is for researchers to go to his manuscripts,
Yeah,
not have to get somebody to decipher what he's actually written, uh,
right.
because
And now, Ed, I have some background on the manuscript and when it went to auction
let us
in
know.
2018. I will drop a link in the in the YouTube chat, um, so people can learn more about that. Um, I was at the home of a noted Sherlockian collector, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and he pulled out a manuscript, which it already blows your mind when you get to see a Sherlock Holmes manuscript in the wild in a private collector's library. The Adventure of the Solitary Cyclist. Great story, right? And he pulls out another one, The Adventure of the Priory School. Ooh, that's a good one because it has maps and ordinances drawn into it too. And then he pulls out a third one, The Adventure of Black Peter, all from the return of Sherlock Holmes. So, of course, The Dancing Men, also from the return, comes up for auction in 2018. I don't know if it's been disclosed as to who bought it.
I think it was, but we can assume not, and then not mention who it is.
It's joining its three brothers in that collection. Let's just
Yeah,
put it that way.
yeah.
And anybody who knows anything about Sherlockian collectors can pretty much figure out who that is. But pretty
I
astounding.
and I'm hoping he will be on a future Sherlock.
He better be. He should have been on this one.
Well, but there's other manuscripts that I'm really hoping that's the one that he'll be on.
Okay,
The
fair enough.
so um uh but it'll be scheduled. So when I talk
Yeah.
to him and ask him to be on. So
And it's just astounding to hold
yeah.
these in your hand. It's just a little notebook. It's your typical essay type notebook about that
The
size.
composition book says in the cover, even on the back of the covers of them, it has
Right.
all those charts for multiplication tables and weights and measures are on the back
Right.
of it.
Right.
Um, that you had when you were a student. They did that in the early 20th century as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, the Empty House manuscript at the Rosenbach is such a joy to have
Yeah.
and to see his method of composition. And I love that he bound these at least these 10 or so in vellum and kind of elevates them in a way that people weren't thinking that this kind of literature was it wasn't literature. These are just magazine stories. And I think Doyle even thought that, at least about his Sherlock Holmes stories. And yet he has them bound in beautifully in vellum as if they belong on some, major collector's shelf.
Well, I think it comes down to this, and as somebody who creates content on a regular basis, when you start a project, when you start a series, you may not know that it's going to be a series, right? And you usually the first couple of episodes, whether it's a podcast or the first couple of short stories, um, they just kind of live on their own. And it isn't until later on that you realize, as you look back, what kind of piece of work that you have, kind of your magnum opus. And in looking back, you can suddenly, not only understand the importance of the collection now, but you can go back and treat those earlier outings more especially add branding, for example, if you're thinking about cover art for a podcast, or add a different theme or what have you. And by the time he got through, I'd say half of the memoirs at least, a lot of these manuscripts were just gone. I mean, it's very rare to find one of those early manuscripts. The Sign of Four is a great example of one that recently turned up. Had been in the hands of a collector for years.
Yeah, and people didn't
Um,
know this collector hadn't revealed it until, they
right.
sell it. Yeah.
And by the time, well, and of course, Hound of the Baskervilles comes along, and I think we talked about this on the show. All of those chapters were divided up and sent out to bookstores to display in the front window as a
Little
sales technique,
frames. Yeah. In
which is it's astounding. But by the time he got to the return, he was asking more money for each one of these stories because he had to be coaxed into reviving Sherlock Holmes.
Mhm.
And we've talked about this before as well. He was kind of like the J.K. Rowling of his day, that he knew he had a blockbuster on his hands and knew that if he bound these, that they could actually get some pretty good money someday. Well, he didn't realize that someday meant 100 years
Yeah.
hence, but I think
Well,
they got, 25, $50 a
he saw
pop.
the collector's market at the time in which tens of
Right.
thousands of dollars were being spent on manuscripts and things, but he wasn't not for, I mean, you know, tens of pounds were spent on his on his manuscripts in that
Exactly.
auction, that Red Cross auction. Um,
Exactly.
and yeah, he wasn't quite in that league yet. I'm trying to remember what uh, Dr. Rosenbach paid for the Joseph Conrad manuscripts. I think
Mm.
it was in the five figures, but it was also two-thirds of all of Conrad's manuscripts, all, at once. But Doyle wasn't
Yeah.
quite in that. The collectors weren't thinking of him, even though they people loved him. They weren't thinking of him as that kind of collectible literary value yet. And certainly now, we couldn't get a manuscript now to save our life with the prices they go for. Well,
Oh.
but all right. So this is published in 1903 in December, and in the Strand, because it's the Christmas issue. Usually their covers, they just have those green blue covers. Um, and for the Christmas one though, you get this nice color cover, and it's the Grand Christmas Double No.
Ooh.
And they don't even raise the price here. It's still 1 shilling as the cost. In early Strand issues, the early Sherlock, they were 6 pence, and now it's gone up to a whole shilling for an issue. But this was, you get double the content, and I'm sure it wasn't even double. It's probably like two-thirds more pages, kind of thing. Um, and But there's no mention of Sherlock on the cover. And here's the Colliers for the American. And again, it's their Christmas issue. So they put this nice, I guess Christmas picture. It doesn't, just without the holly here, I wouldn't guess this was Christmas time, but
Right. Right.
maybe it's this is the Christmas girl this year. It just says, oh, it's Christmas morning is the name of it. Um, Okay. Just a pretty girl selling copies with pretty girls on the cover. That's what Collier's formula was here. But usually in all the other issues in the Return of Sherlock and in Collier's too, actually on Collier's, it's almost always a Sherlock cover by Frederick Dorr Steele in most of the returns. If not, I think maybe all but two, all but this issue and the May issue, which had um I can't remember the story in it. So two issues down. All the rest are Frederick Dorr Steele covers of Sherlock illustrations. And in the Strand, they would always mention that there's a new Doyle Sherlock story in it. But the Christmas issue, we don't need that because everybody's going to buy the Christmas issue. This is the biggest selling issue of the year when they come out. Um, and I love on the Colliers, let's skip over to here to look at the title of it because I love this skeleton cover up here. The you know and I guess inspired by the stick figures code that they could be, you could consider those as skeletons as well. Um, but just the row of skulls here too. This is a proper Christmas, issue story for me because I like the scary stuff at Christmas. Um,
And
and a
is
noose.
is that a hangman's noose that
Yeah,
they
they're
have?
holding nooses because they're gonna hang you, kids. um,
Well,
just in time for the
just like
holiday.
the Cubitt kid,
That's right.
right?
There you go. So, I like also a way they do the first instance. I think it's just the first instance of the letters that he shares with them, because it is a page torn from a notebook, and they have it illustrated that way, that it's not copied in the strand, but they have it as if it's a torn piece of paper. Um, and um, and that's it for this for now. I think we should this also originally Doyle wrote this. This was the fourth story that he had written in the series. He had written Solitary Cyclist was going to be the third. Empty House, Norwood Builder, Solitary Cyclist. And then he replaced it with he switched the order and he asked them to switch the order. I won't go into why because that'll give something away for Solitary Cyclist, and I'll save that for the next episode when the reason why he switched the stories and put and asked them to do uh, the Dancing Men before Solitary Cyclist.
Yeah, and just speaking of that order, my collector friend, he now has four manuscripts in a row as
Wow.
they were published. Dancing Men, Solitary Cyclist, Priory School, Black Peter. Those are
Wow.
all published together in that order. So if you're going to do it right.
Let's get on with the story. The Return of Sherlock Holmes by A. Conan Doyle. 3, The Adventure of the Dancing Men. Holmes had been seated for some hours in silence with his long, thin back curved over a chemical vessel in which he was brewing a particularly malodorous product. His head was sunk upon his breast, and he looked, from my point of view, like a strange, lank bird with dull gray plumage and a black top knot. I love that, observation from Watson there, but it's also this is one of the kind of iconic tropes of Sherlock. The at work at his chemistry experiments in the room. Um, and reading it this time, I wondered, well, was this an image that people was it iconic yet that people saw Sherlock in this kind of pose over his chemistry? And I wondered when it was established. And of course, it starts in Study in Scarlet. That the Watson mentions that he has this. Well, Holmes is doing chemistry experiments when he first meets him, and he also will do that in the on Baker Street. But how often did Doyle employ the image? Well, we actually see him doing chemistry experiments in 6 stories up to this point. Um, and it's 2 other stories. Oh no, 4 other stories mention that he does chemistry experiments. So, and that answers my. It is. This is like early readers expect this. That this is something Sherlock frequently does. It's Study in Scarlet, um, Case of Identity, Copper Beaches, Musgrave Ritual, Resident Patient, Naval Treaty, and this story. You literally see him playing with his chemistry set, and it's just mentioned in Sign of Four, Gloria Scott, Final Problem, and Empty House. So um, an iconic Sherlockian trope, image, whatever we want to call this. I'm using the word iconic correctly, let me point out too, that it is, uh, something that represents Sherlock. So,
Yeah, we recently did an episode on Trifles, which is the weekly discussion show we have about some of the minutia in the Sherlock Holmes stories, which I co-host with Burt Wolder. And we did an episode 403 called Baker Street Fables. And it was, we discussed an article from 1952 by Remsen Tenek Schenk, who disabused everyone of the notion that Sherlock Holmes was actually an expert chemist. Turns out that according to Schenk, he was just a mere dilettante, a dabbler in chemistry. So if you're a fan of the Trifles podcast, you can check that out on the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere YouTube channel or wherever you happen to get podcasts.
he's in our day a real amateur. In his day, amateur would have meant you're very proficient at it. Um,
Sure.
but now amateur tends to have the other meaning that you just dabble in it, that you are a
Right.
dilettante. So, well, we move from that image that readers have come to expect. And I mention this because Doyle's he's continuing this kind of image of Holmes that he wants to hold on to and wants to keep giving. If this works for the readers, let me keep giving it to you. Um, and then we have the Dr. Bell trick that Holmes either plays on Watson or on a client. But in the last story, in Norwood Builder, I thought it was interesting when the client comes in and Holmes is like, "Oh, and I can see you're a mason and this and a lawyer and I forget the other thing."
Asthmatic.
And
Yeah.
Watson now then narrates, "Well, of course that was because he saw this, and the other thing. Like I've learned something from Sherlock." And I love that he did that.
Yeah.
But here we're right back to, how on earth did you deduce that? Um, and he literally says, "How on earth do you know that?" Holmes says, "You do not propose to invest in South African securities." Um, and and Watson is just flabbergasted that he would, befuddled, astonished. Um, let's do
Utterly
that a little
taken aback.
twaddle, Holmes.
Yeah.
Um, um, and also, we should probably mention that the discovery of gold in South Africa in 1886, I think, or the mid 1880s, leads to this kind of boom, and there's a gold rush there, obviously, and then there's this kind of boom in securities in that market from South Africa, and and it is a contributor to the Boer War, which will happen not long after this because it's the Transvaal that they discover the gold in, and then there's all kinds of issues with that. But um, people were investing in it, and Watson is not. I don't know why Watson. It seems like a safe investment in South African securities.
He probably lost all of his money gambling with Thurston.
Well, as it goes along here, then when Holmes explains in just point by point, one, you had chalk, two, you put chalk, three, and I love how he goes through this. I don't think he's ever done this, like literally numbered them, his steps, and explaining to Watson. And number five is your checkbook is locked in my drawer, and you have not asked for the key, which has many people have wondered why Watson's checkbook is locked in Holmes's desk. Does he have a problem with money that he
And
will invest too quickly?
that's the supposition that, Watson, let's remember Watson first arrived at Baker Street with Holmes because he had blown through his pension.
Yeah.
And we know he had an older brother who had died and who was an alcoholic, right? So there's this, at least a family trait of addiction or, some sort of issues with overindulgence of one manner or another. And we know from Watson that he liked the horses, he liked playing cards, he liked playing pool, he liked the ladies. I think those are all the four vices: alcohol, gambling, cards, and ladies. I used to have a set of cufflinks that had the little discs on each side, and those were the four vices that were on each one of them. Um, so it doesn't seem all that unlikely that Watson would have told Holmes, "Hey, keep an eye on my checkbook. Whatever I do, keep me
Does,
from
does he
spending
have to
more
convince
money
him
than I
to
ought
hand
to."
it to him? It's not like, or he just asks, Is it just
Who
that
knows?
as long as I know I have to ask, then I'll have to explain what I need it for, and I don't want to
Exactly.
do that. Maybe that's the only deterrence that Watson needs. Um, uh, to access his money. Well, um, Holmes uses a segue here. He says every problem becomes very childish when once it is explained to you. Here is an unexplained one. See what you can make of that, friend Watson. And he hands him the absurd hieroglyphics, as Watson calls them, the dancing men. Um, and Holmes says, Watson calls them a child's drawing, and um, and we find out that Mr. Hilton Cubitt of, well, in the Strand text, the first edition Strand text, it says riding Thorpe Manor, but then in the rest of the story it does say riddling Thorpe. So I think we can assume that the first riding was just a typo, but and especially because the American says riddling.
Yeah,
Um,
and in the manuscript here, it's riddling.
it's riddling the
Uh,
match. So it's just a typo
but
in the Strand. But
but also interesting in this is right before Riddling Thorpe Manor, which again is from Ridlington, which was about 3.5 kilometers from the Hill House Hotel, which we mentioned before. Um, that is what Mr. Hilton Cubitt of Riddling Thorpe Manor. In the original manuscript, he was Mr. Hilton Jones, and Jones was crossed out and changed to Cubitt.
so yeah, well, and that's interesting because as he's thinking about the dancing men and coming up with his hieroglyphic and thinking about those children, and then he decides, hey, I'll name it after the children in that family.
Yeah, and the note in the manuscript says it appears once again on page 6. This is page 4. Conan Doyle must have changed his mind on the name while writing was in progress,
Yeah.
since the surname Cubitt becomes standard from page 10 through the end of the story.
And names are important to him. He does this. We see this in several manuscripts where he goes and changes names and sometimes leaves blanks and then
Right.
goes back and fills the name in. He knows that, no, I need to come up with a good name for this person or a more appropriate name, and we'll write it in later. Well, Mr. Hilton Cubitt has a very he says well he arrives at Baker Street and he says, well, Mr. Holmes, what do you make of these? They told me that you were fond of queer mysteries, and I don't think you can find a queerer one than that. Um, Holmes is interested only in these kind of queer, or as he calls them, outre things is his favorite word, which Doyle pulls from Poe, from the Dupin stories. This is what Holmes likes to solve, and we've had many instances of stories in this already where he's not interested in solving any kind. It could be like the worst murderer in the world, and Holmes doesn't care. He's like, I don't care about that. Oh, but somebody sent you strange hieroglyphics. Let me solve this one. That's the only thing he's interested in, and that's why, and hence it's gotten into the canon. Watson
Yeah.
preserved it.
Well,
Uh,
and when you think about this coupled with the intro there, so you've got Holmes the chemist, Holmes the mind reader, or Dr. Joseph Bell deductionist, and now Holmes the cryptographer, right? So you get these tropes coming out again and again that make Sherlock Holmes an extraordinarily interesting individual, and the story is an extraordinarily interesting read.
it is a great story, if I have not said that, although I find the cryptogram to be really weak, but part of it to be weak, the weakest part of it. But what's fascinating is I don't think you notice. And then when you really think of it, you think, oh, it was just a simple replacement thing. Like that's not that hard to figure out. I used to do that in newspapers. But in any case, here's the first page of the Strand, and I like the way they've put them in. I like the way it runs across the column. That they didn't want to break it up or make it too small to see, so they literally run it across both columns here.
Yeah.
It doesn't occur at this part in the text. It doesn't occur till here, and then it's into there. I like that about this. We saw in the American in the Colliers how they made it look like a torn piece of paper in the beginning, but
Yeah.
here they've just put it in here, and the and there he is. There's Holmes. Here's the Paget drawing. Here's Hilton back here, and Holmes is looking at the paper. Um, Looking again, rather young. I comment on this. I'm always wondering how young is he going to make Holmes look, because some stories he's looking a lot older than other stories, and I wondered if that was, because his model for Sidney Pettet's model, his brother Walter was aging. But Holmes looks again young, back to younger looking Holmes in this, as opposed to I think the Norwood Builder when he looked older. Um, and Watson looks fairly young too. Although we can come up with a year for this story pretty easily because, well, I say that, and then no chronology, no Sherlockian chronologist was a big, ha ha, ha, easy, huh? Well, let me tell you, um, they because when Cubitt gives his story here, he starts talking. Tell about how he meant. Well, Holmes first says, "Tell the story." So for Dr. Watson, for my friend, Dr. Watson, I like that. He's emphasizing his friendship.
Yeah.
I love that it's emphasized so much in the stories. I'm not even sure how much Doyle was consciously aware of the way he was making them friends and constantly this affection going on between them. But it's so evident once you notice it. Um, but he tells the story and he says, Cubitt starts the story. He says, last year I came up to London for the Jubilee. And that would have been, well, you have two options. You have the Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee, which would have been 50 years on the throne in 1887, or the Diamond Jubilee in 1897, 75 years. Um, uh, it's hard to say that this story is 1887, right? Or do chronologists differ?
I think those who choose 1887 are typically the odd men out.
Yeah,
I've typically seen this as dated on
yeah,
1897.
yeah. Or well, that's 1888 now, which or 98,
Right.
which would have been the because it's a year later now. But it's hard to. It would be really hard to say 1887 for this. These aren't young men. You know, these aren't even though that picture. These aren't. This isn't the beginning of their career.
Right.
Um. So 1897 is the Jubilee. So this story we get a pretty solid date that it's 1898. Um. And which is post, Holmes's great hiatus, and these are these later years. Um, uh, and Cubitt talks about how he met Elsie Patrick. There was an American young lady there. Patrick was the name, Elsie Patrick. Which is a funny way to go about it. But he was in love with her as much as a man could be. You'll think it very mad, Mr. Holmes, that a man of a good family should marry a wife in this fashion, knowing nothing of her past or of her people. But if you saw her and knew her, it would help you to understand. So Elsie's really hot. Like she's like, woo! Oh my gosh, I can't believe you will actually marry me. Yes, yes. Then we're getting married. If you will actually marry me, we're definitely getting married. Um, uh, he's he's probably marrying up in the looks department, but he says he's not rich. But he's a landed family, so he has an estate that at least they live in comfort, obviously. Um, uh, but I think that he's not rich that he's mentioning that is because that's not why she married me. I don't know. You still got your nice estate, and she's an American, and you're going to seem like, a big deal to her as, all these American women were coming over and stealing all of the men.
Well,
Yeah.
even if it weren't for the financial comfort, we certainly will come to find out that Hilton Cubitt offered Effie something of a bit of asylum, a safe haven in England.
That's why
Because
she
she
wanted
was
to marry him. Yeah.
right, right. Because she trying to escape her family, and she just wanted to kind of burrow in there and live a safe country life there in Derbyshire.
But he knows she has a past. And Uh, and then she says to him, well, we'll get to what she calls him in a second, but she says, if you take me, you will take a woman who has nothing that she need be personally ashamed of, but you will have to be content with my word for it and allow me to be silent as to all that passed up to the time when I became yours. Now, usually that's a red flag. Like, usually that's, I swear there's nothing wrong, but I'm not going to tell you about my past. Um, they're okay. There's nothing wrong, but then why won't you tell me? So there's, she has a past that she
Well,
doesn't want him to know, is what it says in the end.
people in those days didn't really talk about body counts, and except unless you were part of a crime family, and even then, you don't want to talk about your body count.
Well, they've never found any bodies to pin. There are no bodies pinned to me. So there you go.
Right.
Um, but oddly, in the in the text, in the Strand text, and no, I'm sorry, in the Collier's text, in the American text, this is right. She calls
Yeah.
him John. She says, "If you take me, John, you will take a woman." John. Oh, we just heard his name was Mr. Hilton Cubitt. Why is she calling him John? Um, uh, this is, Watson being called James by his wife, or maybe she just has this name for him. She calls him John. But the Strand text corrected it to Hilton. And you checked in the manuscript, and it is in the manuscript. It is
Yeah,
John,
it
correct?
is John in the manuscript, and
More than
yeah, I think
one.
a couple of times, just like
Yeah.
Jones was in there a couple of John Jones. What a boring name for
Yeah.
a hero.
Jones would have been
Um,
a good name.
um, but so it was changed to Hilton in the Strand and in the George Noon's book edition. And in the American book edition, which I think was who was the American publisher? McClure Phillips. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the Doubleday. Those were all changed to Hilton, recognizing that this
Yeah.
was an error.
It was an error.
And the note here says there's a possibility that it was intended for him to have a compound name like John Hilton Cubitt, much in the same manner as Arthur Conan Doyle, but that it was changed by Conan Doyle or an editor at the Strand and was perpetuated in later book publishings.
And it's also likely that Doyle would have seen the proofs and would have said, yes, of course, it was Hilton, and
Right.
um, but but it exists, and this is always to my point that I have that I'm always talking about, that when you find differences in in the first publication of the American texts and the Strand texts, that American text means that's because it's in the manuscript. And this even now, I think if you don't have a manuscript for this, there's several stories we don't have manuscripts for, but when they make changes, guess what? It's because that's what it was in the manuscript. And the Strand then later changed. The Strand didn't later change. The Strand changed it at the time, either for house rules of style or because there was a mistake. Um, but the American text, the first publications never want to change anything. They just take it right from
Right.
and it wouldn't have been from the written manuscript, everyone. It would have been a typed manuscript. Doyle had three typed copies made of each manuscript, and one went to the Strand, and one went to America, to Collier's, and I don't know, maybe kept the third. I don't know, but um, so John Hilton, she has promised him that there's nothing he need be afraid of, but then she gets a letter from America one day and then turned deadly white. And then from that day on, there's always a look of fear upon her face. And then the drawlings show up. And she is absolutely terrified of these drawings. She dropped down in a dead faint when she saw them in the garden. Chalk, was that the garden ones? No, it was, they were in chalk and they were rubbed off. And then during the night, um, uh, they were written again. So on paper this time, left on the sundial. And he
See,
showed,
this gets to my point, Ed, that when you start out, before you know something is a full series, you don't take those first episodes, those first appearances that seriously. And he had them erased, right? If he had known that this was going to be an ongoing thing, I'm sure he would have documented what that very first one said. And I wonder, do you have any guess as to what the first message might be? Because the first message we have, which is the one that he brings into Holmes, is Abe Slaney telling her that he's in the neighborhood,
I'm
basically.
here, Abe Slaney. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think the previous message might be,
Um,
or might have been?
for me, it's probably the same. And then it just, no, because he wouldn't have. He didn't know. He wouldn't have known that it was rubbed out. This is what we're getting at, right? Wouldn't he
Right.
wouldn't have known it was rubbed out. So his second one is just M here, Abe Slaney.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought of that. But I guess it is a matter of, I don't know, could it be a warning right off the bat that he was giving her? Um,
Maybe. Um, you know, there's no one else who would have known that code,
yeah.
right? So for him to sign Abe Slaney, that was a dead giveaway, right? Um,
Maybe it was
this is
something
really
like maybe
puzzling.
it was something like creepy, like "Hello, Elsie," you know, like something just mundane, just to scare her. Uh,
Yeah. New
uh,
phone, who dis?
yeah, would
New
have
new sundial, who dis?
been appropriate. You're mine, just you're mine.
Right.
Um, but that he's here now, and it's she's completely terrified. And then I like Watson's assessment here of Cubitt. He says he was a fine creature. Well, Cubitt says, you will, Holmes, you will, it's not a thing I could take to the police, for they would have laughed at me, but you will tell me what to do. I am not a rich man, but if there's any danger threatening my little woman, I would spend my last copper to shield her. And Watson says, he was a fine creature, this man of the old English soil, simple, straight, and gentle, and with his great earnest blue eyes and broad comely face, his love for his wife and his trust in her shone in his features. Um, First of all, Watson loves people, especially men, Watson loves men being chivalrous, right? And that's a very admirable trait. And it is an admirable trait, but it's especially for Watson and especially for Doyle. Um, uh, and but we find this frequently in the stories that Watson can see, it's in his features that he can see the love for his wife and the trust that they have.
And the thing is, I think this is this is the setup for what I think is one of the great love stories in the Sherlock Holmes canon. Hilton and Elsie Cubitt, where she, as you just laid out, she goes into this letting him know, you know, there's some secret that she has. She can't tell him, but he has to trust her, and he does
Mhm.
implicitly, and he cares for her a great deal. And we'll get to this toward the end of the story that she was bereft at well what ended up happening, and took steps to end her own life at that point. So this setup here that Watson is observing this great love story is really cementing in our minds what's yet to come.
And he proves he's even more, trusting in that Holmes says, "Well, can't you just ask her?" And he says, "No, because I told her I wouldn't.
Right.
I won't force her to confess anything to me. Um, so I won't do that." And that kind of that pro I mean, it's like this is like a
Promise is
medieval
a promise.
romance when the
Yeah.
knight makes the promise to her, to his lady, and then he has to suffer consequences because I made that promise, But
Yeah.
I'm willing to suffer this consequences that I made this promise, but he has to know. But this we see this frequently too with Doyle, that Doyle kind of still believes in physiognomy. Doyle believes that you can really understand someone's character in their face. Um, and um, and not in the way that you're like reading someone, but in the way that he believes that that's there, like it's an intrinsic, that it's biological, that this is the way you will look if you have these values. Um, and there's a lot of issues with this coming into the 20th century with, the kind of criminals are born this way and you can see that they're criminals just by how they look, and it's very racist and all that. But for what I find interesting about Doyle is that one of the things about his biography, Scott, is that how could he believe so many charlatans in his life as he wound up doing? I mean, and not to I'm not denigrating his belief in a kind of spiritualism and a spiritual belief. That's fine. But when people were just lying and saying, no, this was a real seance and I'm really doing it, and they're clearly lying to him, but he would believe them because I think he believed if you looked him dead in the eye and told him something, he would think like, you're obviously telling me the truth. Because I can see it in your face that you're telling me the truth. Um, and
Well, he was a man of chivalry. He was a man, just as you described there. And I think he expected, from many gentlemen of the time, that kind of gentlemanly behavior. And to him, it was unthinkable that someone would try and hoodwink him the way that some did. And I don't know if he finally realized it toward the end of his life, but um, I think it was just the eternal optimist
yeah,
and wanting to see the good in people that we have in Conan
yeah.
Doyle.
Well, I think that's there too. And so it's something that I don't kind of, there is something admirable in the way that he goes about his beliefs and professing them and continuing them. Um, but I don't know if I'm making this connection clear, but I do find this idea that he thinks he can read people, like because of course you're telling the truth because this is what because you're honest, and so this is the way you would look. And but he's assured of that because he understands that is a biological thing that happens in people that you can't
Right.
lie because then you would
If you,
look there'd be some shifty thing about you. Um,
yeah, the oscillating head of James Moriarty,
yeah, like they
like a
look
reptile.
evil. He's
Right.
evil, and that's so he looks that way. Um, All righty. Let me take this moment, everyone, to thank you all for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow Sherlockians worldwide. I hope you will consider supporting the Rosenbach and Sherlock Monthly by donation, which you can do so at our website, or you could become a Rosenbach member. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, exclusive invitations to member-only events, early access to registration for programs and courses. Um, there are lots of great winter in-person and online programs and courses. You can find that on our website right now. And the winter ones, they start in January through March. And if you're a member, you can start registering on December 20th, 2024. Um, but non-members can't register until January 2nd, 2025, 2 weeks later. So if you're a member, you get a chance to make sure you get a seat in one of these courses or a spot at one of these programs. And when I tell you that it's important, it is in the sense that in our fall programs and courses, Scott, everything sold out. Absolutely everything we did sold out. So we're doing even more courses now. We've got 7 courses coming up in January through March, and then 7 more will come up in April and May. So there'll be lots of things to do there. But you can see them all at rosenbach.org. If you are not already registered for Sherlock Monthly, I invite you to do so at our website. I send out emails every month with links and info for each episode. So you'll always know when an episode is coming up. They're usually the third Saturday, but of course, this one's the second Saturday of this month because I don't want to get too close to the holidays. And I think next month is the same because I've actually got the third Saturday is Baker Street irregular weekend, so we're on the second again. But usually on the third. But it doesn't matter if you're registered because you'll get the email tell you exactly when it is with the link to it. And I want to tell people about another biblioventure that is now available for registration for everybody, members, non-members alike. And this is a paid one. This is a paid biblioventure. We did one of these for Sherlock. We did The Hound of the Baskervilles. It's a subscription only biblioventure for 8 episodes. And we have another one coming up. And for 8 episodes in February and March 2025, this will be subscription only. I will lead a conversational annotation with a team of rotating co-hosts to provide context and insight about Oscar Wilde and the picture of Dorian Gray. We'll also field questions from the audience on every episode. We pay particular attention to that when we do the subscription shows. So it's not just me and a co-host talking. We're constantly taking feedback from people to lead the discussion. We will also enjoy some signature cocktails, although I haven't been doing the Sherlock tales for Sherlock Monthly. I'm just drinking an ale. We'll definitely do them for the picture of Dorian Gray. I mean, I can't pass up the opportunity, Scott, of having absinthe appear more than once on the show. So for picture of Dorian Gray. The Rosenbach has a significant collection of Oscar Wilde's manuscripts, books, and photographs, which will feature in several of our episodes. We don't actually have a copy of Picture of Dorian Gray, but we're borrowing one from another institution that we'll have on display at the Rosenbach, and I'll be able to share images of it as well. And I like the connection between Dorian Gray and Sherlock Holmes in that it was the luncheon or dinner that both Doyle and Wilde were invited to for Lippincott's magazine to contribute, and Doyle winds up doing Sign of Four, and Wilde winds up contributing Picture of Dorian Gray for Lippincott's. So both published in Lippincott's magazine in London and Philadelphia first. So joining me as co-hosts for Dorian Gray will be a couple of prominent Sherlockians you may know, Dr. Anastasia Klimchinskaya, who has previously co-hosted Sundays with Frankenstein and Sherlock Mondays with us, and Paul Chapman, who is also in our Hound of the Baskerville series, but he was also a co-host on Monsters and Ghosts for the Jekyll and Hyde episodes. So also joining us will be Dr. Petra Clark and Dr. Samantha Nystrom, who if you are in the Rosenbach's area, you may go to the Rosenbach's book club series. We have two of them that meet in person. One of them is called The Ladies of the House of Love, and the other is called The Body in the Library. And Drs. Clark and Nystrom lead those book clubs, and they'll be joining me for Dorian Gray. So I hope you'll register for it. We've already got a bunch of people registered. It starts in February 2025. So if you're watching this episode in the future, maybe it's already passed. But if you're watching live or before then, it'll be a lot of fun, and we'll really enjoy it. And I hope you will take that biblioventure with me. All right, Scott, back to the story. Thanks. It was a long commercial break because I'm so excited to Dorian Gray. That 1890s fantasiacal horror stuff is just, it's so exciting. It's not just because get to drink absinthe on every show. So. And you're muted now, Scott. So you've muted yourself to let me have my commercial.
I was going to say absinthe makes the heart grow fonder.
It certainly does, and it makes you drunker too. Let me tell you, definitely makes the heart drunker. Well, back to the story. These she won't tell them what's happening, and they are Holmes tells him that he won't ask his wife. And then I like this, Scott. He says, Holmes promises, he says, then I will help you with all my heart. That's an odd thing. I don't think Sherlock's ever said that to somebody. I could look that up and really examine the stories, but that's a very personal thing. Like, I am absolutely going to solve this case with all my heart, not intellect, not because you're hiring me, but Holmes is almost making it a personal thing here, not just professional.
Yeah.
That this is a story that really appeals to him, and I think it must be. It's like what Watson pointed out too, and how chivalrous Cubitt is. I think that's playing a part of this too. That Holmes really recognizes that this is a man whose marriage is worth saving.
Yeah.
Maybe is something like that, and it's also weird. So like, yeah, he definitely wants to solve this. No one's come to him with this yet. Well, Holmes starts, and he tells him that, if you get any fresh dancing men, send them my way. Any fresh dancing men show up. The interview left Holmes very thoughtful. And several times in the next few days, I saw him take a slip of paper from his notebook and look long and earnestly at the curious figures inscribed upon it. Um, and he's pondering over this. And as anyone knows who does any kind of cryptographic puzzle solving, there's very little he can do with one little example. If he's kind of needs a little more to go on, at least with, what is the what is the first one we know now, right? It's I'm here, Abe
I'm
Slaney.
here, Abe Slaney.
That's a really hard one to solve just without having a little more info. So,
It is, although we are fortunate that Abe Slaney's name contains so many instances of the letter E.
yeah,
What if his name was Bob Cobb or something? I mean, would have had a little more difficulty. You would have taken a few more notes
yeah,
to do that.
Hilton Cubitt would have been harder. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but he is hoping that he will get some more, and he says, then he later says it tells Watson that Hilton Cubitt may be here any moment. He has some new incidents of importance to share with us, and he has more dancing men. Now the next one that he receives is it at Elridge's? Yeah,
Yep.
is at Elridge's,
Mhm.
and I would say all this now. You've all read the story. I'm not giving anything away, but these are the messages as they go. I was like, no, we don't know that yet. Yes, we know that because we've read the story. Um, but and then the other one is
Come,
Come Elsie.
come, Elsie.
Yeah. So and they've received these, and he stays up late, to catch the person who's leaving them. Um, and I determined to lie in wait. So he gets out. I got out my revolver and sat up in my study. And of course, Elsie comes down in her dressing gown and says, "No, you have to go to bed. You can't do this." But she won't tell him why. And then he sees him. I saw a dark, creeping figure which crawled around the corner and squatted in front of the door. Well, it sounds gross, but he's just writing is what he's doing there. He's not
Right.
leaving the paper bag on fire. Um, it's not Frank. And run. Um, he's
See, now
writing again,
that's a message that doesn't require a cryptographer to
and
solve.
then he comes out and he's got his pistol. But she prevents him. She throws her arms around me and held me with convulsive strength. It reminds me of the movie Body Heat when he's breaking into the house, and then she yells, "He's got a gun!" But who's she yelling it to? Like she's trying to help, but she's trying to help both people. And here she
Right.
wants him to get away. She feels like she doesn't want this guy to get shot, but she clearly doesn't want her husband to get, shot either because she
Well,
knows.
and that's interesting. You think about the psychological motivation for Elsie. One is, yeah, I think she still might have feelings for Abe Slaney. She's, protecting him, but at the same time, she's also protecting her secret. At this point, she thinks it's
Yeah.
still manageable, that she
Yeah.
can still kind of keep this all under wraps.
And then there's another piece of paper, and this is the one that has a mistake that Holmes does that Doyle never realized because Holmes doesn't either. This symbol here, let me share it for this one. Um, is this last message right here? It's supposed to. We learn later it says never, but that's not an R. I think that's a
Never.
Yeah, it's a B. That's Neveb, it said. So, um, which, hey, maybe Abe just messed up. But Holmes does say later that this says never. Just a
And
little,
interesting in the manuscript edition here. The note is this illustration for this set was changed for Collier's. They corrected the erroneous symbol for the last letter, R, but did not correct the third letter, V, which was also used as P in the message on page 21 of the manuscript,
Hmm. Oh yeah,
which
look,
that,
see, they corrected here. This is, yeah.
right? Yeah,
They did make it never, but then they didn't correct the later one.
correct. The one that's Elsie, prepare to meet thy God.
That's wrong as well. Yeah. Well,
Note that the American edition books, although American printings use the text from S with British spellings, but use the dancing men illustrations uh, from Collier's.
when you're going to do stick figure cryptograms, there's going to be mistakes. You've really got to pay attention.
Yeah,
You really need extra proofreading to make
yeah,
sure it all works. Because nobody, and I guess there are people who could do this, Scott, who could just look at these and like know the letters already and
yeah.
off the top of their head. I can't. I need a cheat sheet every single time. I can never remember which of these. I would have to spend so much time with this
I
alternate.
only remember it because of the length of each of the words. I can kind of figure
Yeah.
out what it's supposed to say just by the number of letters in each word.
But if somebody gave you another message in it, you would be as
No,
yeah.
no,
So
I'd have to look up the code.
yeah.
Yeah,
So well, Holmes now, because of this, knows that this is a very deep case. He says, Cubitt says, for an instant, it had crossed my mind that perhaps she really feared. What she really feared was that he might come to harm, for I could not doubt that she knew who this man was and what he meant by these strange symbols, but a look in her eyes which forbid doubt. Is it? But I looked at her, and of course she's telling me the truth, or she's lying to you, Hilton. But she's not. In this story, she's not. But any number of femme fatales would have lied to you with the same look. But luckily, Hilton's not facing that situation.
yeah.
And Holmes later then Holmes says, I fear it is too deep a case for such simple remedies that this is just going to be, just put Cubitt says, oh, just put some farm lads out there to chase him away. And Holmes is like, no, this is serious. There's something really deep going on here that we need to solve. Um,
And here's my question is why does he allow Hilton Cubitt to go back
mhm.
alone? Hilton says he needs to be back because he wouldn't leave Elsie alone at night. Understandable. But Holmes says if you could have stopped, stayed in London for another day or two, I might possibly have been able to return with you in a day or two. Well, what does Holmes have on his plate that is so pressing that he isn't able to go back with Hilton on that actual day?
I think he relies on the speed of telegrams and the speed of getting places. Um, he says this in Copper Beaches. He says to this girl alone on this estate, just send me a telegram and I'll be right down. And I think he believes that I could get there in time to save you, almost in a way like he's tricked by how quick technology can get him notice these days. But of course, it might not work, and it didn't in this case.
Right. Well, knowing how serious it is, right? And knowing, let's not forget, Ed, that I guess it would have been about a decade or so before in The Adventure of the Five Orange Pips, which was another story that involved coded messages, although
Hmm.
it wasn't anything anyone needed to figure out in terms of actual words. It was simply a message that was being sent by virtue of leaving another message on a sundial. um, he let his client go out by
Yeah,
himself on his
that
way
one
to
was a
Waterloo
total
Station.
mistake. That was a
And
total mistake. He
you would
never should have
think
let
he
him.
would have learned from that
Yeah.
and made sure that he didn't do the same thing in this case. But
Is he waiting to hear back from America?
that's a good question. I don't know if he started his inquiries at that point
He says,
yet or
then he
not.
wrote a long telegram upon a cable form. If my answer to this is as I hope, you will have a pretty case to add to your collection, Watson. He's
There you
waiting
go.
for that response to find out, wait, who's Abe Slaney? And then when he hears, oh, Abe Slaney is a Chicago gangster, we
Yeah,
got to go. And then the train's too late, and then they
that's
can't
it.
get there in time.
That's it.
So, but right now he knows that there's something deep and this could be something dangerous, but he's not sure of it until he gets this confirmation
Yeah.
and from this. So a delay in that answering telegram and 2 days of impatience followed, and then Hilton Cubitt sends him a letter with that final message, which we know, which is then prepare to meet thy doom. Um, and and that's Holmes bent over this grotesque frieze for some minutes and then suddenly sprang to his feet with an exclamation of surprise and dismay. His face was haggard with anxiety. We have let this affair go far enough. I think he doesn't realize it until then, that how deep this is. But as soon as he gets that, then it's like, uh-oh. And then they don't have a
Yeah.
train, like they have to wait till the next morning for the train.
Right. Right.
So I don't
Yeah,
think
the
he's
train to
nearly at
North
fault.
Walsham.
Yeah, I don't think he's nearly at fault in this one as he was in Five Orange Pits. These guys were going to kill him, and he knew it right away.
Yeah.
Um, be careful they don't kill you, and I'll get in touch with you tomorrow. Send him
Right.
on his way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, um, yeah, then they're going to get the next one. He says, we should not lose an hour in letting, and then we should not let an hour lose an hour in letting Hilton Cubitt know how matters stand, for it is a singular and dangerous web in which our simple Norfolk squire is entangled. Um, and then Watson lets it know. He says, so indeed it proved. And as I come to the dark conclusion of a story, I experience once again the dismay and horror. Um, these are the chronicles of facts, and I must follow to their dark crisis the strange chain of events. So you get now we get the first reader gets all of this, lead up that this is something really bad that's happening now. Um, and And I like the reminder too that Watson is the chronicler. These are the chronicles of facts. Not according to Sherlock, they're not. They're just romances taken by facts and added all this, romantic story around them. But who knows? Yeah, maybe Hilton Cubitt didn't even care about his wife, never said anything about it. And Watson's like, oh no, we've got to make this. He's got to love her and always cherish and honor her. And um, they but we find out that it's not going to go well,
Yeah.
and that is certainly what happens. And they head down on the train and get to the station. And what is Sherlock wearing at the station? The deer stalker. Thank you, Sidney
Uh,
Paget. There we
ah,
go. There we go. A deer
nicely
stalker.
done, sir.
He knows he's going off into the country, Norfolk area. This is a hat that he would have worn, not, the top hat. This is the hat he would have worn heading to the country where he's going. So, because it doesn't say it in the text that he's wearing his cloth
I've
cap. There we
got
go.
the holiday
Oh, I
deer
love it.
stalker.
Yeah, from Rudolph.
Rudolph.
Yes, when he does.
I'm busy, mama.
And he's wearing that he doesn't wear it inside. He wears it when he goes out. He's in the
That's
igloo
right.
there
In the
visiting
cave, stalking deer.
visiting the deer. So, um, I never made the connection that it is a deer hunting hat and Santa wears it.
Well, he's such a fine, jolly old elf.
There you go. No one likes a skinny Santa. Oh, that's a different episode. That's a different Christmas. There we go. Oh, does he talk? No, he's just
All right, that's
all
that's
righty.
enough Santa.
But he has a deer stalker. Um, they learn from that station master who was in that illustration that the Cubits are are have been shot and that Hilton is dead and she is unconscious and not expected to recover. And is suspected of shooting him and then shooting herself, murder suicide. She's not dead or wasn't by last accounts. You may be in time to save her yet, though it be for the gallows. Um, well, they didn't get there in time. Uh, uh, Seldom, Watson says, have I seen him, Sherlock, so utterly despondent. Realization of his worst fears left him in a blank melancholy. And then he says he's lost in gloomy speculation. Leslie Klinger in his annotations thinks that it was black melancholy. That's what I want to ask in the manuscript, because he didn't mention the other manuscript for another note. Leslie Klinger in his annotated edition. So maybe he didn't have the manuscript to look at the time. But I wonder if in the manuscript it says black melancholy.
It does say black melancholy
It does.
in the manuscript, yeah,
So
which
yeah.
makes more sense.
It does. Makes entire
Um,
sense. So yeah.
but it was changed in every single one of the publications.
You know what that means, right? That means the typescript said blank, most likely. So,
Hmm.
I mean, it doesn't, probably what happened is the typescript said blank. And so, because if the American says blank, then it was in the typescript that they had.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's my theory, and I'm sticking by it. And I've got a deer stalker on, so I look more authoritative when I declare that. Um, and Holmes is upset, as he should be upset that his client is now dead. This is the client you were supposed to help. And not only is he dead, but his wife is also on death's door. And they get to the house, and he is going to, and there's an inspector there. It's Inspector Martin of the Norfolk Constabulary. And he seems kind of able here. He's not like the bumbling, London inspector. He seems like he knows what he's doing. He's surprised Sherlock's there. We're like, oh, how you're here already? And he's like, well, I anticipated it. Sherlock says, I came in the hope of preventing it. Um, and he realizes he must have some info. Sherlock says, I have only the evidence of the dancing men, which must have really like confused him. Like, what are you talking about? Have you seen any fresh dancing men? Would have really, surprised him. But
Yeah,
uh,
we had a whole kick line come through here.
but Holmes then says, I am very anxious that I should use the knowledge which I possess in order to ensure that justice be done. So you can't save the client. Well, at least you'll have to, make sure that they catch the villain. And Sherlock can do that, obviously. Um, uh, the inspector says, don't worry, she'll be fine, because the bullet had passed through the front of her brain. It would probably be some time before she could regain consciousness. Just the front of her brain. So she'll be fine.
She'll be fine. She'll be expressionless, but she'll
Yeah.
be fine.
Yeah. So she gave herself a lobotomy. She'll be okay. I can't imagine she's going to be okay, but she is. She winds up okay. Um, he tells him that one pistol was found in the room, two barrels of which had been emptied. Cubitt had been shot through the heart, and the revolver lay on the floor midway between them. So, the question is who shot whom. Um, and Martin thinks that, well, the way it is, she must have shot him and then committed suicide. I mean, it could have been the other way around. People do that. People did in the past do that sometimes. They literally put the gun at their heart instead of their head. I think it's
Right.
assumed that people always do it to their head now. So it could have been either way. Like this is a murder suicide. Um,
And interestingly, in the original manuscript, Doyle originally wrote both he and she were fully dressed, and then he crossed that out, and then he wrote neither of them were completely dressed, and then he crossed that out. And the note is another moment of indecision for Conan Doyle. Uh, and he just determined that neither one of those sentences was uh, satisfactory, so he struck both of them out and just left it.
They both read kind of weird, like, "Ooh, they weren't dressed." I mean, it sounds like something the Strand would have said. No, we're not saying that they're not dressed, or not even completely dressed.
Yeah.
Um, but of course, he's trying to allude to the fact that they both come down during the night, that they weren't there
From
already,
bed, right.
come from bed. Um, Holmes asks all the usual questions. Has he body been moved? And this guy's got the place locked down. He's doing, he's doing a competent job here. Um, we've only moved the lady. We haven't touched anything. Um, and then Holmes asks that he says that we need to hear the story from the servants first. That's the first thing is let's hear what the servants have to say. Um, and then Holmes sat in a great old-fashioned chair, his inexorable eyes gleaming out of his haggard face. I could read in them a set purpose to devote his life to this quest until the client whom he had failed to save should at last be avenged. So he's going to devote his life or the next 2 hours to solve it. And that's
And
all it takes.
interestingly enough, and this is a minor point, in the manuscript, rather than should it fail to save should at least be avenged rather than at last be avenged. But it was changed and must have been again from the typescript.
Interesting. Yeah. Should it but they both work
They
actually.
both work. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, that could be a TypeScript issue. Um, they had they find out from the servants they had been aroused from their sleep by the sound of an explosion, and a minute later by a second one. The study was open, a candle was burning upon the table. The passage, as well as the room, was full of smoke and the smell of powder. The window was shut and fastened upon the inside. Um, and then Holmes notices that well, he asked if they were that they smell the powder when they ran out of their rooms, and they did. I commend that fact very carefully to your attention, he says. Uh, and he's saying that to Inspector Martin, but he's saying that to the reader. I mean, Doyle's put that's for your reader. That's
Yeah.
like, here's a clue. I commend that fact very carefully to your attention, reader. Um, and and then he goes in, two have been fired, two wounds inflicted, so each bullet can be accounted for. This is Martin. And Holmes says, well, what about the third bullet that hit the window? And there's a hole there that Holmes points to. How did you ever see that? Because I looked for it. And now Holmes is you're just a provincial inspector in Norfolk. Let me tell you.
And this is one of those classic Sherlockisms.
Yeah.
Um, how do you know that? Well, I followed you. Well, I saw no one. That is what you may expect to see
Yes.
when I follow you. Or the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime. Well, the dog
Yeah.
did nothing in the nighttime. That was the curious incident.
Yes.
These instances of Holmes with this rejoinder are just so baked into what we expect of him.
That is a great one too, because I looked for it. Because he realized, and what he's saying is, and then he'll later explain that, that the window must have been open for them to smell. So the window was open. So who was in the window? And he's already putting it in, he's already put it together in his head, as he will explain, that there were two shots fired at once, and that was a big explosion, and then there was a third shot. So he's, put this together. Um, and because he's already put it together in his head, he knows to look for the third bullet immediately. That there was, something there, or there could be a third bullet, and that's what he was looking for. Um, Martin is so impressed. He's like, "All right, you take care of everything then." now he's like, now he's like, "We're not working together, clearly." Right? That was the first thing. Like, can we do it together? And Holmes is like, "Sure." And now he's like, "Yeah, we're not doing anything together. You're just solving it." And the candle has not guttered. That's why he knows the window is open for a short time, not a long time. I guess if a long time it guttered, mean it would have gone out. or I'm not sure what guttered specifically means.
Well, that the wax would have spilled off in one direction.
Yeah,
As the flame gets blown in, you'd see wax splattering on the floor. You'd see it coming down the side of the candle in one particular pattern.
there you go. Um, so again, well, there are other examples that Holmes does these little things, but some of them are future stories I don't want to mention. Um, the butter, that's a future story. Uh, Martin is oh, and then her little handbag is there. It was a lady's handbag on the table, a handbag of crocodile skin and silver. Um, I like that. I don't,
Hmm.
I can't recall a story with crocodile skin handbag for this, like country lady. This sounds like something she, maybe brought back from Chicago. Uh,
Something exotic. Yeah,
Holmes opened it and turned the contents out. There were 20 50-pound notes of the Bank of England. Um, that's a lot of money.
that is.
Uh, which
So
has led to
50,
questions. How did she get that much money that quickly?
right. So 50 pounds, and this is a note in the manuscript series, 50 pounds from 1898, when the story is said to have taken place, would have a current retail price index value of 5,000 pounds and an average earnings value of 19,700 pounds. So 1,000 pounds would have been the equivalent of current values of between 100,000 and 394,000 pounds.
A lot of money she's got.
Yeah. So,
And even more if you had them in antique bills. So there you go. Yeah, the
so
actual thing now.
we're talking about £250,000 in today's value.
Yeah.
That's But how she got that from the bank, or whether she
How much
squirreled
did
these
she?
up under a mattress,
Yeah, that's the real question
where
because
was the ATM?
she would she could of course ask her husband, say like, I need 1,000 pounds. And he would give it to her because this is what he does. She would say, I need it, and you have to give it to me. And they ask me questions. Like, we set this up. This is our relationship. I say this, and you say yes with no questions.
That's some deal.
They, but
She
that would
must
have
have
been
been really hot.
that would have been really extreme. Any noir crime story from the 20th century, these femme fatales, you always believe it, and it could be true. But but if she didn't, and she wouldn't want to ask him for that, obviously.
Right.
Does that mean that she's got some cash squirreled away just in case?
I
Um,
would imagine, coming from the family that she did, I would imagine that she escaped with some money.
she's got a go
Whether it
bag. She's
was
got a go bag. She's got a go bag ready, ready.
exactly,
Yeah.
whether her father set her up with it years ago, or whether she stole it or whatever, she's got access to some serious cash.
Now, if it was, oh man, if Doyle had only thought it through and said they were American notes, it would have been like, oh man, then that would have said something else. But he doesn't. She's honest. Here's what she is. So we want her to and I love that there are lots of, theories about this you can find written that like it's a conspiracy all along that she was involved in, but
Yeah.
that's not what's going on in this story. That at face value, Doyle has presented her as this is a situation that we learn about that she wants to get out of, and she really does love her husband. Um, they and Holmes now says, now it's the now is when he reveals about the shots. They were probably fired at the same time, and this is when the inspector says, "Whoa!" The country inspector's face had shown his intense amazement at the rapid and masterful progress of Holmes's investigations. At first, he had shown some disposition to assert his own position, but now he was overcome with admiration and ready to follow without question wherever Holmes led. So, And now Holmes is like, yeah, just let me go. I'm going to proceed on my own lines. I'll figure it out. I'll let you know when I've wrapped up the whole thing. Uh, I have the threads of this affair all in my hand. The tangled skein he has, and he is slowly unraveling it all. And he's got the threads to solve this. Ask if there's anybody in the area, any in name a name of Elridge's. There's a farmer. Okay, take this note to Elridge's farm. And he takes the various slips of the dancing men and writes a note and sends it to Elridge's. Uh, and I saw, and then Watson says, I saw outside the note, and it's addressed in straggling, irregular characters, very unlike Holmes's usual precise hand. It was consigned to Mr. Abe Slaney. So he's disguised his handwriting and sent it to Abe Slaney with using the dancing men. Um, and and now he tells the inspector, well, you'll have a particularly dangerous prisoner to convey to the county jail, so be ready. And then so nonchalantly he says, if there is an afternoon train to town, Watson, I think we should be do well to take it, as I have a chemical analysis of some interest to finish, and this investigation draws rapidly to a close. So Watson has already said Holmes is going to devote his life to catching this guy. And now he's like, is there a train to home? I have some chemistry to do. Um, he has solved it. And this is Holmes. This is his, way of expressing himself that, uh, seems rude to some people, but it's just, of course he solved it. And now he's just moving on.
Yeah,
Um, And now this is his explanation of the case here. And this is unusual, Scott, because usually you get the explanation after they catch the criminal, right?
right.
And I'm trying to, yeah, I can't think of others where we get this much information. I could be wrong, or we get this much information before that final catch. But here it works because it kind of ramps up this guy's a real dangerous guy coming. This is a criminal from Chicago. So um oh wait, no, well that's not what we get yet. No, or do we get yeah, we get everything because now he talks about
Well,
solving,
this is how he explains the code,
yeah,
right? And
solving the
that's
code.
what this time is needed for.
Yes. Um and he's saving the capture for that more climactic end.
Right,
The because you don't want the story to end as like, now let's tell you how I solved the code. No, that's not a good ending. You need the
right.
capture at the ending. Here is now how we solve the code.
Yeah,
And
we get the how right now, and what we're waiting for when we meet Abe is the why. Why
yeah,
this all played out this way.
and Holmes is fairly familiar with all forms of secret writings and is himself the author of a trifling monograph upon the subject in which I analyze 160 separate ciphers.
You know,
Trifling monograph. I love
a
it.
trifling mon and he seems to have these trifling monographs at just the right time, doesn't he?
He does.
It's like Batman's utility belt. You know, in the 1966 movie with Adam West, Batman's on a ladder, a rope ladder coming out of a helicopter, and he's down in the bay, and a shark has attached itself to his leg, and he reaches in his utility belt and pulls out the bat shark repellent,
Dark
which
repellent. Yep.
wasn't clear whether it was bat repellent or shark repellent. Evidently, it works on both, and he sprays the shark and it releases it. Well, how fortunate that the utility belt just happened to have shark repellent in it that time, just like Sherlock Holmes happened to write a
He
monograph
has
on.
written a trifling monograph on it. So this is the fifth monograph that he has specific monograph he has said he has written. There'll be seven total. The first one, the upon the distinction between the ashes of various tobaccos, is mentioned in three stories, I think. Monograph on tracing of footsteps in sign of four. There was a monograph on the form influence of a trade, your job, upon the form of the hand. He mentioned that in sign of four. And there was a monograph on the dating of documents. and Hound of the Baskervilles, and now this secret writing one. There'll be two more to come in later stories. Holmes is likes to write his trifling monographs. But
Yes. And we did an episode of Trifles, episode 43 on Sherlock Holmes's monographs.
how many times is the word trifle used? Because you guys have taken it from a different instance of the use of the word trifle. I
We
think
have it's not mentioned all that often, quite frankly. Um,
I
we
don't
had
know.
put together a spreadsheet of quotes that we're going to use with trifles or trifling in it, and I want to say less than 20.
22.
Okay, there you go. Neighborhood. I get points for that. I get points for that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I love Trifling Monograph because in the Sons of the Copper Beeches, of which I am a member, I'm the recorder of pedigrees. We have to give a Trifling Monograph in order to finish up and become a master copper beech smith. Do other scions use Trifle Monograph for the papers they deliver, or is that just us? I
Um,
don't even know.
they they might.
Yeah.
Mileage will vary, certainly.
Well, this one is Holmes says the object of those who invented the system has apparently been to conceal that these characters convey a message and to give it the idea that they are mere random sketches of children. Um, that the symbols stand for letters, and now he gives some real practical advice on this is how you solve a cryptogram, and it's all true. That you look for the most used symbol, and that's likely going to be an E because it's the most commonly used letter, and then kind of work through some combinations, and he's able to solve this. The uh and I do like this about it. This idea that these criminals are using this, and people would think, oh, some kid was scribbling there. That's not that far fetched, actually. That's kind of looks like some kid was just drawing stick figures. That clearly fits with Doyle's inspiration for these, in which he saw a child doing this
Yeah.
in the autograph book. Um, and the big inspiration for this, and lots of people will mention it, and it's likely true, is that Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Gold Bug, um, in which a code is used to tell Walter Legrand where to find buried pirate treasure on Sullivan's Island in South Carolina. Um, and it was actually the most successful story in Poe's lifetime, believe it or not.
Hmm.
It won a $100 prize contest. There was a stage production of it. I think it's the only Poe story that had a stage production put on for it. It was everybody knew it, and up until you know into the 20th century, it was considered a classic. It's not. There's some real bad racist stuff going on in it, so it tends not to appeal to people as much anymore. We're not as forgiving as that, as we probably shouldn't be. And but it is it's the whole story is constructed around this character solving these cryptograms. And Poe was also, before he even wrote the story, loved doing cryptogram. He was very much interested in cryptography. He had a column in Graham's magazine in Philadelphia called "A Few Words on Secret Writing." That was the first one. Then the rest were all just called Secret Writing. And he would write about how to solve these. People would send him cryptograms, and he would have to solve it in the column. And was a thing that he really loved to do. Uh, this story is also, according to Robert Louis Stevenson, admitted that the gold bug was an inspiration for Treasure Island as well. And Doyle ranked the gold bug not only as one of his favorite Poe stories, but as one of the greatest stories ever written. And in he
Wow.
wrote, and in his Through the Magic Door. which is a kind of reminiscence of his life as a reader. Read that, people. I love his
That's a great
through
book.
the
Yeah.
magic door. And it's just about him and all the books he's read in life and how they've inspired him, and it's really wonderful. But he wrote, not only is Poe the originator of the detective story, all treasure hunting cryptogram solving yarns trace back to his gold bug, just as all pseudo-scientific Verne and Wells stories have their prototypes in The Voyage to the Moon in the case of Monsieur Valdemar. If every man who receives a check for a story which owes its springs to Poe were to pay tithe to the monument for the master, he would have a pyramid as big as that of Cheops. So
Hmm.
that Poe's contributions are the largest man-made structure in the world, and that's how big he was. He says, um, and yet I could only give him two places in my team when he's trying to figure out stories, the greatest stories. He says one would be for the Gold Bug, the the other for the Murder in the Rue Morgue, obviously Dupin. He says, I don't know, I don't see how either of those could be bettered, but I would not admit perfect excellence to any other of his stories. They're like, these are the greatest. And the others are like,
Eh,
these two have a
you can't win them
proportion.
all.
Yeah, these two have a proportion. I love how honest he is here. These two have a proportion and a perspective which are lacking in the others. The horror or weirdness of the idea intensified by the coolness of the narrator and of the
Mm.
principal actor, Dupin in the one case and Legrand in the other for Goldbook. So Doyle knows his Poe really well. And
He knows his Poe, and he knows the importance of how a narrator connects with an audience.
yeah,
And I think that is the magic behind, I mean, behind our magic door here
yeah.
with the Sherlock Holmes stories and why he was so successful over the course of 40 years. 40 years and 60 stories, 56 of them short stories. And that's why we have Holmes and Watson.
Mhm. Holmes then gets into well, he talks about how to solve a thing, and then he talks about this in particular. And it's, the notes are, I'm here, Abe Slaney, and he goes, how he solved that slowly, and then at Elridge's, um, uh, and then he um he finds out he contacts an American. Um, well, because he assumes Abe Slaney's American because she was, and Abe is an American contraction. So I guess Brits wouldn't have said Abe. Um, uh, you'd be not Abraham or Bram. You would be like Bram
Bram, yeah.
Stoker. There you go. He
Our commenters here earlier in the stream had said, you know, he was a gangster. Shouldn't his nickname have been Ace?
yeah,
That would have been more believable. But you know, coming out of Chicago, Illinois,
Chicago.
Abe Lincoln. I mean, coming right out of the Lincoln era. So Abe would have been something that somebody would have named their kid around that time.
He writes to his a friend. He says, I therefore cabled to my friend Wilson Hargreave of the New York Police Bureau,
Yes.
who lets him know Abe Slaney, he's the most dangerous crook in Chicago. Um, and then the final note that he got that Slaney sent was, Elsie, prepare to meet thy God. Um, uh, so now he this is when he knew that uh-oh, this is bad, and didn't get the train wasn't running on time, couldn't get down there.
You know, it's a good thing Holmes and Watson weren't watching Arrested Development because they could have thought that it was Elsie, prepare to meet thy Job.
There you go. We needs the G and D to solve it, or that he needs the D to solve it.
The
Prepare to
D.
meet thy, yes.
You need a G and T.
Um, well, he assure he's Martin says he isn't he going to escape, and he says no. Why should he come? Because I've written and asked him. Another casual comment there that he makes, because he has. This is what he's done. He's sent the note to him, um, and he shows up, and he is a tall, handsome, swarthy fellow, clad in a suit of gray flannel with a Panama hat, a bristling black beard, and a great aggressive hooked nose, and flourishing a cane as he walked. And he swaggered up the path. Now, I'm wondering if there isn't something a little anti-Semitic going on here. Swarthy, hook nose, and his name's Abraham.
Yeah.
And he's a crook,
That,
and he's like, this kind of, but if you'd be surprised, like, there's no big Jewish mob in Chicago, and that, maybe there was then. I know that, in New York, I'm not sure in Chicago. I don't know if Doyle would have been privy to this kind of information, but there could be something anti-Semitic going.
well, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, you're not too far off of, the big rise of the gangster era in
Yeah.
America, and we know there were some Jewish elements there. Um, and knowing how vile some of the things were, the racism, the anti-Semitism at the time, I mean, or anti-Semitism. I'm too many glasses in now, Ed. The anti-Semitism. This is, see, for folks who are watching, you should really tune in for the last third of the show, because that's where it really gets hilarious.
I've moved on to cider now. I'm drinking hard cider, obviously. Yeah.
Well, I mean, come on. Um, but yeah, I mean, it does raise the prospect, and I had never thought about that before you just raised that point. All the times I've read this, and I've seen the
Especially with the
photos,
big beard.
the
I mean, he's very
mustache and
he's very
beard.
Fagin looking. He's like Fagin,
Sure,
Fagin with a Panama hat is
yeah,
what he looks like.
which may explain why Elsie's family wasn't too keen on her hooking up with Abe Slaney. From
Yeah.
the Irish, wanting to kind of stay with, another Irish lad in the
Yeah.
the gang. This, I think this is a really interesting aspect of it.
The story begin in the Strand. The story begins as has now happened for every story since the final problem. They begin with an illustration that is usually the big ending climax, and to get you ready for it. And Doyle's a little bothered by this. There's a couple stories, not Sherlock stories, where he has requested the Strand. No. Could you not have that in the very front, because that kind of gives
Right.
it. One of his Brigadier Gerard stories has Napoleon lying dead in the first picture. He's like, they're not supposed to know that until they get to the part in the story. Um,
Right.
so and I wonder if he's annoyed at that, but they, like, the final problem has Holmes and Moriarty going off the cliff, but it's captioned "The Death of Sherlock Holmes." Maybe you don't want to know that before you've read the story, but
Right.
they've also been advertising for months that Holmes is going to die in this
Right. Right.
final story. So it's
Yeah.
not that big of a shock, but you really shouldn't be seeing these images before you've gotten to the end of the story.
Yeah.
Um, and here is the illustration and the end of the Strand, or the beginning of the story that we now go back. Because then when you're reading it too, what's going to happen is you're reading the Strand, you get to the end, and you're like, oh, that was a picture in the front. You're going to go back and look at it anyway. So I
Right.
don't know why I
Right.
didn't save it for that. But here he is. He comes in the door, and Holmes right away, the pistol at his head. And Martin quick puts the cuffs on him. Um, that's a real Holmes as a man of action right there, right? With the pistol in his hand. And he's done this to one other character. Remember? Scott?
Which,
I'm putting you on the spot
hmm,
here. Which other character does he come out of the hole and Holmes puts the gun right to his head? Red-headed
I
League.
don't. Which one?
Red-headed League. When the
Oh, that's right. He
uh
came up out of the hole. Right.
can't think of his name, and he comes out, and Holmes just puts the gun to his head because he
Vincent
knows,
Spaulding. Yeah.
yeah, this is a dangerous guy. I
Yeah.
cannot, I cannot say, hey, you're under arrest. Gun to the head. Don't move.
Yeah. I forgot about that one. Yeah.
Martin puts the cuffs on him. Um,
Yeah.
so, and there he is with his Panama hat, because only an American's going to wear a Panama hat to
With a
Norfolk.
flannel suit. Come on.
Come on, this is the hat you wear to Norfolk, buddy. What are you wearing? Um, Slaney is and Slaney laughs. He's like, he glared from one to the other of us with a pair of blazing black eyes, and he burst into a bitter laugh. It's a laugh, it's a bitter laugh, but it's a laugh
Yeah.
nonetheless. Um, and
You have the drop on me.
Holmes says that she's Mrs. Hilton Cubitt is seriously injured, and then he's upset. Um, well, you told her to prepare to meet her God. And then he says, I tell you, there was never a man in this world loved a woman more than I loved her. I had a right to her. So it's a possessive love. It's that abusive thing that some people call love, but it really means I own you, you're mine, nobody can have you, and I'll kill you
Uh,
if you're not mine. So
He'll
that
never love you as much as I loved you.
yeah, he's got a right to her. And then Holmes tells him the story. She broke away from your influence when she found the man that you are, and she fled from America to avoid you and married an honorable gentleman in England. Uh, you dogged her and followed her, made her life a misery to her in order to induce her to abandon the husband whom she loved and respected in order to fly with you, whom she feared and hated. Um, and then drove her to suicide. The death of a noble man and driving his wife to suicide, you will answer for it to the law. And his response is he doesn't care what happens to him if she dies. So now he's regretting this threatening her before, because now she's going to, be dead. But um, he seems even more shocked, though, that about the cipher. He's like, wait a minute, who sent me how came you to write the cipher? And he says, what one man can invent, another can discover.
I love that quote.
Um, and but this is the point where I got to say, like, this is a really simple, like, just one of the what do they call it, the replacement ciphers,
Yeah,
substitution.
substitution code. Yeah,
This wasn't that hard, dude. And once you know it's
right.
an alphabet, all you need is a few examples, and you just figure it out. Like,
Exactly.
so I remember being shocked. I remember my dad used to do the cryptogram in the newspaper, and I was, as a very small child, I was like, oh my God, like, what witchcraft is this? Like, how did you know that? Um, did you know the quote ahead of time? And and I think he kept it a mystery for a while and never just told me. And then one day at some point he was like, it's actually you can figure it out. And he showed me how to figure it out. And I was like, ah. And then I lost interest. I was like, well, that's not that big a deal. Um,
Uh,
but a simple substitution cryptogram isn't that difficult to figure out once as Holmes explained,
right.
you know, um, you start with letters and then start trying to figure out words and there you go. But
Yeah.
um, uh, so but I don't think it becomes. I mean, I say that now, but I've read the story I don't know how many times, and I don't think anybody encountering this right off the bat kind of notices that it really wasn't that complicated. I'm pretty sure the gold bug one is really complicated to solve, or much more complicated to solve. Um, but
Well, and this kind of harkens back to um, what Holmes made Watson pledge at the beginning of the story when he made those deductions about playing pool with Thurston. He
yeah,
said, I should make you sign a statement to this effect that, it's you're going to say it's also absurdly simple when I explain it to you. And here we are at the end of the Dancing Man. You go, oh well, this is pretty easy. Well, yeah, it is, but you had to be able to figure out that code along the way to be able to decide what kind of actions you were going to take and the timing
yeah.
of them. And clearly Holmes screwed up in that. It wasn't terribly easy, in the end for him either, because if it were, he would have telegraphed New York from Norfolk rather than from London.
Yeah, I'm not sure what his call. I mean, maybe a telegram should have been sent. I know the train isn't arriving, but they could send a message. Yeah, so he should have.
Yeah.
But he now tells Slaney, okay, at least you can spare her because she is suspected now in this. So, and then he's like, okay, of course I will, because I love her. He's gonna tell that the story, and he fills in all the clues, all the things here that he was in a gang in Chicago with her father. Elsie's father was the boss of the joint. Um,
And there were only seven of them in the gang. This wasn't a huge network. It was
yeah.
just seven people. So that narrows down who's going to be able to actually understand
Yeah.
and use this script.
He was old Patrick, and he's the one that invented the code here. Um, and then he explains what happened that night. Um, that she came down to try to bribe him to go away with money, and he tries to pull her through the window, and then the husband comes in, and then she sinks to the floor. I was healed also. Um, and he takes out his gun to scare him off and let me get away. He fired and missed me. That's the bullet that hit the windowsill. And then, but he shot at the same time and shot Cubitt. And then obviously she shut the window and then killed herself. Well, tried to kill herself with Cubitt's gun. Um, and then I will, which made me walk in here like a jay and give myself into your hands when he got the note. There's the jaywalking thing. Because I've read several origins of the phrase jaywalking, and some of them are really, imaginative. But there is a to walk like a jay thing in American slang in the 19th century, well, we're
Yeah.
20th here, which just means to be just casual and like you don't have a care in the world, like you are walking across the street against traffic and you shouldn't be
Huh.
doing. So this is one of my examples that says that, yeah, it's just kind of like walking like a J. That's the way the expression came. It's not, you don't have to get any more complicated to solve that. But I'm sorry, that's a whole other thing.
I
um,
like that. I like
yeah.
that.
And you can find other examples of people doing of mentioning this, like to J or to walk like a J is just to be, you don't have a care in the world. Um, but here, the American criminals in the canon so far. Um, we've had the KKK and Five Orange Pips, of
Yeah.
course, with the first ones I think of, but if you think about it, the very first story, right? Jefferson Hope, Enoch Drebber, Joseph Stangerson. I mean, it's like these Mormon guys. No, but they're also criminals. They're murderers, and um, uh, but this is the first time I think we get this like criminal class, right? This is a gang. These are professional criminals here in from America. Obviously, we've had professional criminals in England, but I think this is the first time we've had them as American, isn't it?
I think you're right.
And the
I mean,
KKK is they're criminals, but it's not really what they do, like to make money.
right.
Um,
Yeah, I'm thinking back to some of the earlier stories. The only other, well, the first time we experienced an American, as you say, Drebber and Stangerson. Um, then in the Yellow Face, which there really wasn't a crime at all.
yeah,
Um, and I can't think of any others in the memoirs. Have the Baskervilles, of course, Sir Henry's Canadian. But yeah, this is this is really our first run-in with American criminals. And when they're associated with a gang, we just came off of Holmes breaking up the network that Professor Moriarty had in the final problem. It's the
yeah,
final story in the collection of the memoirs. But that's in fresh memory. The empty house, of course, he explained all of that. That was a whole criminal enterprise.
yeah.
So now hearing echoes of this from an American
But he
standpoint, where
hasn't done the American side yet. To bring
yeah,
American
this is
criminals
this is
in. Yeah.
exotic and exhilarating and interesting, I'm sure, from a city like Chicago.
They yeah, and I just don't I don't know how much gangland talk, or criminal gangs have been talked about from Chicago yet in the press that he would have been available, that would have been available to him. I know in New York he certainly heard about it, but he must have heard about Chicago criminals, and so
No.
now he's added it to this story. Um, well, Holmes's final message to him is what we learned was come here at once. That's how he got him to come. Uh, and uh, and that's the last line of Dancing Men that we have in the story. But then
Yeah, and
again,
this
we end.
is
Go ahead.
we know that Abe Slaney is condemned to death.
Yeah, we get an epilogue. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
before the epilogue, even we get the we have ended by turning the dancing men to good when they have so often been the agents of evil. And I think that I have fulfilled my promise of giving you something unusual for your notebook. Like not like, thank God we got the criminal, we avenged him. Holmes is like, yeah, we got a great story here, huh? 3:40 is our train. Let's get back to dinner. Holmes is very for all the Watson saying like he's going to avenge him and Holmes is just like, all right, good, let's go have dinner.
yeah,
And then we
yeah.
get an epilogue. Read the epilogue.
Yeah, the epilogue is fantastic. The American Abe Slaney was condemned to death at the winter assizes at Norwich, but his penalty was changed to penal servitude in consideration of mitigating circumstances and the certainty that Hilton Cubitt had fired the first shot. Interestingly, in the original manuscript, it was, and the doubt as to which shot was actually the first to be, and then Conan Doyle scratches it out. So, um, and to me, this is the most tragic part of the whole story of Mrs. Hilton Cubitt. I only know that what I've heard, she recovered entirely, and that she remains a widow, devoting her whole life to the care of the poor and to the administration of her husband's estate. You know, she lost this true love in Hilton, this man that would have been her protector,
Yeah.
and lost him at the hand of a previous lover. You can only imagine the excruciating emotional agony that she must be going through, knowing that previous love is imprisoned for life, and this man that she thought was going to save her from this life of crime is now dead.
Yeah. Someone asked the question here, how do we know that Elsie tried to kill herself?
Hmm.
I just think it's the only way, well, if we believe Abe Slaney's story, and I don't, then well, we don't know. Maybe he shot them both. And but no, the window's fastened on the inside. So
Right,
that's it. She has to
right,
be able to close the window and fasten it. So she's not been shot until the window's been fastened.
right.
So and that was the gun used. So um you
Right.
know,
Ostensibly, she would have still had it in
yeah.
her hand or near her hand at that
The only
point.
other person that could have shot her would have been her husband, and then he then gets shot by Slaney. So it doesn't. It's really hard to figure out another way that makes sense with what we know from the characters and what was going on that
Right,
would, I think, make sense.
right.
Um, Unless, she knew that if I only graze the front of my brain, I'll inherit everything. Shoot him, do that. But no, Slaney confirms that he was there and he fired the shot that
Yeah.
got the other guy. So, well, it is. It's a sad ending for her and a story that Holmes solves the mystery, but doesn't save his client.
Right.
And we've had five orange pips, and this one, and engineer's thumb. He doesn't have to save anybody, but the criminals get away. Um, uh,
Scandal in Bohemia.
yeah, Scandal in Bohemia. That I mean, begins with a case that he solves, but doesn't. in time, uh,
Right.
where he's bested by somebody. So they're great that it's one of the things that I think makes this story appealing. Um,
Yeah, I mean, Sherlock Holmes doesn't have to be perfect. I think if he were perfect, it would be unbelievable. And because he is human, just like we are, I think that's what made readers really seek out this character and write to him. Right. Again, this is at a time when 221B Baker Street didn't even exist as an address, and yet people were writing to this individual thinking he was a real person.
And Doyle
Um,
is getting letters this year, as he's this that he wrote this story in 1903 from people asking him for Sherlock's help. Um,
right.
some were just probably as kind of joking, but there were people legitimately like
Right.
it's hard because if you just read the stories in the Strand, it does seem like somebody has written this and this is a real person. And it's not that hard to figure if you're not really aware of that kind of the wider world of popular culture, it might seem like these are the reminiscences of
Yeah.
Watson, that Holmes is real. Doyle also loved this story, and this was one of his dozen stories that he chose. Uh, um, he says he chose them in no particular order, but right. So this is three, or did he choose them? No, he did choose them. This is his number three story.
Yeah.
Baker Street dozen book. So third best story when he had a contest, and he came up with 12 stories. And if anybody could name them all, then or the closest to naming them all, he would give it a prize, and someone won that prize. And recently, Matt Hall has tracked down the person, Sherlockian Matt Hall has tracked down the person who won the prize and has researched him.
Really?
Yeah. So and did a presentation
That's
on it for the Baltimore group.
oh, for the Six Napoleons?
Yeah, he did that. They're at the Enoch Pratt Library, and they have their
Oh, the Enoch Pratt. Yeah. Oh, that's
he did a
fantastic.
presentation. I can't remember the name of the guy that won it. But anyway, it was there's a really great book you can buy called The Baker Street Does, and you can find used copies of it easy online. And I don't think it's in print anymore. And which they have all the 12 stories that Doyle had, and then there's a little essay after each story. And they've added a 13th because Doyle didn't include Silver Blaze, right? Is that the
Yeah,
one?
he was he
That's
he was
crazy
upset.
not to include Silver Blaze.
Well, he was upset with his ignorance of matters of the turf,
Yeah,
saying that half of the people in it would have been warned off the turf forever
that's a good story.
had it occurred the same way that he thought. But it is a masterful story. So what you get there, Ed, is a Baker's Street dozen.
Doesn't, yes, 13. So, but Speckled Band, Redheaded League, and Dancing Men were the top three. And then Final Problem.
Yeah,
But uh so he admired it. He thought that this was a good story. Now, whether or not, he's the good judge of his own output, it's a whole other question because, you know, he would have thought that none of these stories were as good as any Brigadier Gerard story anyway.
yeah,
So, um, uh, but there you go. It's one of the it's a story that everybody, and it's a story I think is great. I like the construction of this. Um, that it relies on cracking a code, and then once it's cracked, you expect, all right, now Holmes is going to, well, you assume Holmes is going to solve this and then go catch the bad guy. And then what happens is, oh, guess what? Your client's killed first, and now you can catch the
yeah.
bad guy, but that's a different kind of story.
Really is, and I think it does a marvelous job of showing Conan Doyle is a master storyteller here. We get the human elements, we get the mystery elements, and we get the elements that we talked about Sherlock Holmes and his ability to make deductions and the chemistry set and all the rest. Um, this story has it all, like many of the stories, there aren't a lot of happy endings in the canon. If you look across all 60 stories, there are a lot of tragedies that this is life.
Hmm.
And again, I think that's what makes this appealing is it's not a fantasy tale. It's not something that we place on another level. This is part of something that we all might have experienced at some point in our lives. And again, I think that's what makes Conan Doyle and the creation so believable and so enjoyable.
Yeah. And there's that overall thing with mystery stories, and it works with Sherlock too, in that, he's kind of restoring order. Like these bad things happens and he's helping restore order, but that doesn't always mean everything is okay.
Right.
And as we have in so many different stories, we see that played out. So, good stuff.
Yeah.
Sherlockians, thank you for joining us for episode 34 of Sherlock Monthly. Scott, thank you for going on this biblioventure with us. Um,
Ain't no adventure like a biblioventure, Ed.
I thank you. I like that line. We'll get that put on a shirt. I hope maybe we'll get you back again. That would be great. I'd be happy to have you back again. Um,
Always happy to chat with you and to talk about Sherlock Holmes.
Coming up next month, Anastasia Klimchinskaya, speaking of who's going to be on during it, will return to talk about the adventure of the solitary cyclist. That will be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you to the sponsor of Sherlock Monthly, Lisa Washington. We couldn't do these shows without the generous support of our patrons, and you too can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You could also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. And let me remind you all to subscribe to our channel, to like these videos. That helps in the whole algorithm so we get higher on and people see us in searches. So that's a good thing. Uh, I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, where the game is a book. Thanks, Scott. And let's see if I can share and thing doesn't all crash down on me. If it does, I'll be right back, Scott.
No problem.